Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Political No Brainer, the podcast where we move way past winner takes all politics and into real conversations. I'm Jeff Rabinowitz, and this season we're bringing in voices from all sides to challenge assumptions, bridge divides, and build a better understanding of today's biggest issues. And today I am joined by Temple Grandin, an incredible success story in life, uh, an incredible scholar, an incredible researcher. And I'm excited to have you, Temple. So I want you to go ahead and take the lead on this one. I want you to go ahead and talk a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your career. I have some questions, but of course, I want you to do most of the talking because it's great to have you.
Okay, you probably want to talk about autism too, some?
I do. I want to talk about autism. I want to talk about your journey as far as as far as beating autism and becoming the success you have, the great scholar and professor and researcher you've become. Because I think children with autism, we generally in the past few months have heard the term um, Earth's valuable minerals. I think autistic children are a valuable part of society, and I don't think we don't take advantage of their abilities because we don't harvest them correctly. We don't.
Well, the thing in my book, I've written a lot of books, and there's a lot of famous people like Einstein, who was probably autistic, no speech till age 3. Bill Gates has a new book out now called Source Code, where he talks about that he's probably on the spectrum. Um, Lots of scientists, mathematicians, artists, probably on the autism spectrum. Now, it's a very big spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, you might have Einstein. At the other end of the spectrum, you may have somebody that does not speak and cannot dress themselves. You see that you have a very big range. Now, when the kids are little, and I was one of these kids, they can look very severe. When I was 2.5, I had no speech, constant tantrums, screaming, sit all day, rocking, spinning things, all the symptoms. And I was very fortunate to get into great early education by 2.5, with emphasis on learning speech. The other thing was a big emphasis on was learning how to wait and take turns at games, all different kinds of games. Really important thing to teach autistic kids. And then also skills like eating with a spoon, using utensils. And one of the things I want to credit my success with is I've had excellent teachers all the way, starting with my speech teacher. Then my mother taught me to read at age 8. I did not read. The whole word technique for reading did not work with me. What worked was reading books out loud with phonics. And within one semester, I went from no reading in third grade to sixth grade level reading. I had a great third grade teacher, and then I was a bored student in high school, got bullied and teased, and had no interest in studying. And I want to credit my science teacher with getting me motivated to study by giving me interesting projects. And then I realized that studying was a pathway to becoming a scientist. Also, I got interested in the cattle industry when I visited my aunt's ranch in Arizona. And then Anne, who ran the ranch, was another important mentor. And then later on in my career, there was a building contractor who seeked me out to design facilities. He
Wow,
showed me how to start a business. These people were all important mentors very, very early in my career. I want to make sure I give them credit.
that's incredible. And so you know what's interesting, and I didn't think of this before we just talked. Now we talked yesterday. I had enormous challenges learning to read, and the teachers told me I would never know to read. They chalked it up to my dyslexia. My dad actually taught me how to read in just that way, just like you said. He would get books, and I became a really serious reader. I actually one of the things me and my dad used to do together is go to the library on Saturdays, and I always remember. And I think I've told this story on the podcast before. The one thing I would read is newspapers because there was no Google back then. You know, I'm not a
Yeah,
young
that's
man.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was learning to read on things like The Wizard of Oz.
right. So
Let's
I
start with a,
love newspapers, and they were in the corner of the library hanging on sticks, and I would just and that's how I became a current events wonk. And I know people saw, some ability in me, but I don't, and I may be on the spectrum for all I know. It was never identified, but um and I'm fine, and we're fine with who we are. But the truth is there's so many times, and like you said, children with autism have to learn the simplest things like waiting in turn to start or play a game. to read, to and I just think we should make this a big part of our K through 12 education system, not necessarily the like you said you were bullied because they just put you in a regular classroom, which is fine. You grew from that, but bullying's not fine. And so I'm always looking for solutions. How do we treat
Well,
these
the
kids
only
better?
places I was not bullied was friends who shared interests. I really want to emphasize that. And for me in high school, it was riding horses. My science teacher was also the coach for the Model Rocket Club. And that was another place where there was no bullying. For another kid, it might be the school band. Um,
Right.
it could be being in a school play. There's a lot of different things like this. But friends through shared interests. One enterprising teacher in elementary school started a Star Wars club because the autistic kid in her class liked Star Wars. And that was a way to get that to get friends for that kid.
And that would be something again, another great lesson learned where we literally take this understanding that you're giving to us from your own experiences and we implement it in schools where and we talked about this yesterday a little bit. So we talked about retired people getting involved in volunteering or even getting paid in the school system. And that, for example, like you said, that one elderly person that's sitting home bored out of their mind right now could be in a school making great use of themselves and maybe start a Star Wars club or maybe start a small rocket
Well,
club. And
exactly. Another thing we've got a big problem with. The research is very clear on the importance of early intervention. I was in a great program by 2.5, and just had two teachers in the basement of their house in a housing development. There's two older, really, really good teachers. And and right now we've got kids that with no speech on a 2-year wait list. That's absolutely unacceptable. Like a 3-year-old shouldn't be waiting 2 years. Well, let's get some of these retired teachers to come in and play games with these kids. Teach them how to wait and take turns. We can call it library play or church play or something like that because we've got to get working with them. We should have some retired teachers come in and teach a science class or teach the art class in a school. We need to tap into the resource of retirees.
absolutely, and that's a huge resource that would make a huge difference in their
Oh,
lives as
absolutely.
well. And
Absolutely.
so reflecting on another life experience, I remember a friend came over to my house. I live in a bit of a rural part of Florida and I have a big backyard. And she had an autistic child, like you said, communication skills. He literally back then, this has been years now, he had sort of like what looked like an Apple iPad, but it was a primitive Apple iPad. It was his way of communicating. He it was helps him communicate. And so we were playing some video games and he liked that. And then we went in the back and we were playing soccer. Well, he couldn't make heads or toes of soccer, so I got him a broom and he was able to hit the ball with a broom and we called it broom ball. We like created a game
Okay, well,
and
that's
he just
great.
loved it. So just thinking of that I've never been athletic. Maybe some of these elderly people have never been athletic, but who knows what game they could play with these kids that would intrigue these
Well,
kids.
that's right. And I was kind of klutzy. I never got really good at any sports. That tends to be an issue with autistic kids. But when I was in high school and I was bullied, the one place I was not bullied was volleyball. I actually got decent in that.
That's
Uh,
beautiful.
yeah, and another kid is basketball. Try different things. Now, one of the things that was interesting with both me and Bill Gates is a lot of our upbringing was very similar. When we were young, 8 and 9 years old, we both had to be party hostesses and hosts at parents' parties, where that teaches you how to talk to people. Like when the guests came in, they had to be greeted at the door. Another thing is we both did was selling things for charity. That taught you how to go up to people and talk to them. Those were important, very important things to learn because there's a scene in the HBO movie where I go up to the editor of our State Farm magazine and I get his card because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that'd be really good for my career. And I had the guts
Wow.
to go up and get the card. That's what selling candy for charity can do for you.
It
I
creates
think it's
communication
simple
skills.
things that people can do. Things like the party hostess, they can sell candy for their church charity or whatever, and they're things that cost very almost nothing to implement. And there's a lot of talk now about increases in autism. Um, Now, kids with speech delay have always been around, and they used to just label them mentally retarded. That's what they did. Also, the diagnostic guidelines have changed over the years. In the 80s, to be labeled autistic, you had to have speech delay. Then in the early 90s, they came out with Asperger's syndrome, which is socially awkward, no speech delay. Then in 2013, they merged it all together. So you get into a situation is when does slightly geeky and socially awkward get labeled autism? You see, in the mildest forms, it would just be a personality variant. But I think another thing that's led to the increase is we don't teach social skills the way we used to. And I'm realizing now, and especially after reading Bill Gates' book, the importance of these of doing the party host and hostess thing. Also, all the screen time. That's made things worse. So the slightly geeky person is a bit more geeky and gets a label. I think that's
Right.
another thing that's
The video time.
all the video time we got to get kids out doing real things. I mean, I have a very nice field in between my condo and the school, totally away from the road. In the 50s, kids would be playing in that field. I've never seen a kid in that field.
In years. They're
In
playing
years.
video.
I have been here for 35 years. I've never seen a kid playing in that field between right behind my house and the school.
So, my kids are my oldest especially is a social butterfly. He volunteers at all the dances, but and he doesn't have any sign. He does not have autism. He's really an outgoing kid. He's got a wonderful
Yeah.
personality. He volunteers at all the dances. Imagine if we literally took the initiative to coordinate my son with some autistic kids and let them be a part of bringing people into the dances and introducing them to one another. And and imagine, like, my kids are into swimming, and that's literally a 6 day a week sport. So, like you say, you don't want to see my kids out in the field very much. When we're in the backyard, we play soccer. But imagine if we get kids more involved in the schools and stuff, in outdoor any type of game, like you said, volleyball or kickball, and include the kids that have autism. Just those simple steps would make a huge difference in these kids.
Well,
Because
that's right. Real simple things. And I thought it was very interesting that Bill Gates did. Mrs. Gates did a lot of the same things with Bill that was done with me. She put him in Cub Scouts, and Mother had me in all kinds of summer activities and children's group. We had a thing we called group, and we'd play softball, or we'd go blueberry picking, or we went swimming. There were different things that we did, and those things were really important.
yeah, and I was a socially awkward kid, and I joined the Boy Scouts. And I remember it's amazing the things that come back to me now. I remember walking through the school and there was this teacher, and on his briefcase, because back then you carried briefcases, was a big Boy Scout album. And I literally, like you said, I didn't like talking to people. It took all the courage I had to walk up to this man and say, "Hey, are you a Boy Scout leader? I want to join the Boy Scouts." And he said, "Yes." He gave me a form. I told him, the only reason I want to join Boy Scout, he said, just want to camp. My parents aren't campers. He said, "You could camp." He said, "You got to show up for a meeting." And it became a significant part of my younger life where we camped, we fished, we swam. There was a hill with railroad ties that we used to run, and I ultimately became semi more athletic than ever before just joining an organization like that. They were all open minded to me, and I started to talk to kids. Now I talk to everyone. Obviously I do a podcast, but it really changed my life.
No, no, and there's been a lot of things where scouting has been a really good activity for individuals on the spectrum. Um, but we got to start working with these kids young. I also do a lot of talks to business people. I just was doing a talk yesterday in Denver to a company that does insurance. And I said, we need the skills of people on the autism spectrum. And when you're on the fully verbal end of the spectrum, there's kind of three kinds of skills you get. There's kind of three different types of autistic people. And I discuss it in my book, Visual Thinking, the hidden gifts of people who think in pictures, patterns, and abstractions. I'm an object visualizer. I'm an extreme visual thinker. That's made me good with animals. It's made me good with designing things because I see it. And then another kind of thinking is the visual spatial pattern mathematical thinker. And there's some autistic people that are extreme mathematicians. Now, you're not going to find an extreme mathematician, an extreme object visualizer that can see how mechanical things work in the same person. And then you talk about so-called normal people, they can be mixtures. But I'm very concerned today that all the algebra requirements that we have are screening out the object visualizers. I've done a lot of work in construction, designed a lot of equipment for the beef industry, and I worked with people that had big machine shops that were absolutely autistic. They could not do algebra. We
Right.
need we need these minds, and I know people that are like they have big construction companies and corporate jet started out a little tiny shop and they can't do algebra, and I'm worried that they wouldn't be able to graduate from school today. And we need these skills Because as I travel around, I'm finding broken elevators and broken escalators everywhere. It's because there's nobody to fix them. They're playing video games in the basement, probably on an autism diagnosis. And the worst things that schools ever did was taking hands-on classes out of elementary school. I was doing shop in fifth grade. I was sewing things with a toy sewing machine that sewed in fourth grade. First grade, we were doing clay. And in my generation, we made ashtrays. And I know never would do that today. But that was one of my first craft projects. They be candy dishes now.
So I love Play-Doh. When my kids were small, I used to go to Walmart and buy 6 or 8 things at a time, different colors. And we would and I just and it's like you said, that's changing. We call it BOCES where I'm from. In New York, they called it BOCES. These vocational schools of all sorts, plumbing and stuff, and they took it all out of the school system. And I never understood why they did that. But it's really a place where we actually do a podcast with a gentleman. His name is Daryl Blackall. He runs the Orlando Workforce Academy, and this is what these kids do after they get through high school, and they can't do algebra, and they can't possibly graduate because, like you said, these are expectations they simply can't meet. Then they go to his school and they do an AB schedule, or they get a job in something they actually can do, and they can earn grades as a part of doing that job and also showing up for school, and they get a real high school diploma. So these alternative education things are something we need
Well,
to
we need to be
examine.
doing these things because I talked to a veteran I sat next to on a plane, found out that she could not do algebra, flunked out of college. I could not pass an algebra class today, and I've designed a lot of equipment and done a lot of different things. And she went and enrolled in the Army, and she took the mechanical aptitude test, aced it. They basically said to her, "You have one job: you fix airplanes, or you fix airplanes. That's what you're going to be doing." You see, in mechanical aptitude is not something that our educational system values.
And I don't understand why, because it's an incredible, it's like you said, you go to places, you see broken escalators for 2 weeks at a time. When the malls used to be a popular thing, this isn't something new. So when malls used to be something you do during the day, this is, I'm 60 years old. This is 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm 77 years old, so
Yeah, we're not getting younger, but I remember the
no, we're
escalators
not.
were always down. And the fact of the matter is, like you said, that's a skill that will never go away. I don't care elevators will never go away.
The
And these are
elevators are going to be mechanical forever. And the thing is, the people that go into the very high-end skilled trades, they're going to be laughing all the way to the bank, where the
right.
other people are getting laid off because of artificial intelligence.
Right, that's true. And like you said, those kids, some of those kids or a majority of those kids, I don't know what the percentages are, could be autistic and be great at these careers. And we don't see these moments and we don't see these opportunities as opportunities. We see
Well,
them as a push the kid aside. He'll stop showing up for school eventually. What does he
well, the
need a
thing
high school
that
diploma
another
for?
thing that worries me, and I talk about in my talks, and I'm working in the food industry, is this very specialized equipment that we have to buy from high wage countries like Holland, for example. If you want to build a chicken processing plant today or a pork processing plant, you have to buy all of the specialized equipment from Holland. A lot of it comes out of Italy, Germany, Denmark, high wage countries. Well, this is the price for taking out the shop classes. See, in Europe, at ninth grade, you can go tech or university, and they don't stick their nose up at tech. You're talking about complicated equipment. It's all mechanical equipment. And people that are object visualizers are very good at designing mechanical equipment. And so we got a skill loss situation. I'm not talking about inexpensive clothing. I'm talking about very high end mechanical devices for food processing that come out of high wage countries that we used to make. I've been in the cattle industry for 50 years. 20 years ago, we made all this stuff, but that's not the case today.
And
And
then
it's
when you go
very expensive to okay, if a chicken plant, for example, how about 100 shipping containers to outfit my chicken processing plant?
And and then when you talk about, and I'm not going to go down this particular rabbit hole of tariffs, but when you think about the fact that these are machines that aren't being made here not because of price, because once
No,
labor is high, price goes up. And these are high paying countries. These are high wage countries that are
but they're
building.
machines that are intricate mechanical devices, difficult to manufacture. They're things we used to make. Now we still can do a beef plant because we got one person who can't do algebra. that started out with a tiny welding shop and started building things in the beef industry. And now he's building entire plants. And I'm sure he's hired mathematical engineers because where you need a mathematical engineer in a food processing plant is doing the refrigeration. That requires math. My kind of mind doesn't touch refrigeration. You see, you really do need the different kinds of minds. And of course, now he hires those people. But there's stuff we don't make that's very high on things. Like, for example, the Steve Jobs Theater, the structural glass walls. They're from Italy and Germany. The state-of-the-art electronic chip making machine is from Holland. Has lots of mechanical devices on it. Even though it's based on research done in the US, it's made in Holland. Well, it goes back to our educational system. And there's a lot of interest in making things more merit-based, but mechanical aptitude is a skill that can be measured. And also you have to develop it some, because a lot of the mechanical aptitude tests have got stuff about pulleys and ramps and all kinds of things like that. And if you haven't ever played with those things, you'd have a harder time passing it. Leverage is one of the things that's in a mechanical aptitude test. But it's a different kind of thinking than mathematics, where you're looking at patterns. Because I worked with people that were definitely autistic, owned big shops, total non-mathematicians, 20 patents.
And they're able to hire mathematicians where the need arises.
Well, they hung and hire them. That's right. And they, really good patents. A lot of that equipment, even though the patents are now expired, it's still being used.
And imagine the maintenance contracts too. So let's take this into, and do you agree with me? Imagine the maintenance contracts, the money people would be making on maintaining these machines.
Well, this is a big problem. We can't, even here at the university, I was just hearing this the other day, we have a shortage of maintenance people. I'm, they can just figure out how to fix things. Another thing that worries me, we're putting doing some good technical things. But I went to a technical college where you had a 2-year degree, maybe in factory maintenance. And I'm going, please don't require algebra for factory maintenance. I have to have practical arithmetic. But it's a different way of figuring things out. I went out to Stanford to give a talk on my different kinds of thinking. And a lady came up to me, and she works in facilities maintenance. She says, I go into the basements of the buildings, and I go up on the roofs, and I listen to the equipment, and I can tell you when a bearing is going to fail. And then I order that spare part, so I'll have it when it fails, just by listening. Well, I can totally understand what she's doing. This is like a great school of engineering. The mathematicians don't get it, what she does. I said, I totally get what you do. And you order a new pump before the one fails, as you
So,
can hear it.
so you want to hear a crazy connection I'm about to make with that is the
Yeah.
BP oil explosion. That was a valve. Valves have bearings. Could you imagine if we had those engineers on that deck and she could listen and hear a valve going out or hear a
Well,
problem
the
and
other
say,
thing, I sometimes sit next to people on planes, and I've talked to a lot of oil field people on planes, and had very interesting conversations. And one of them told me that the hydraulics were connected backwards on the blowout preventer. Well, if you do that, then the valve's not going to close if you
and
put the hoses in backwards.
and
That's what
and
an oil field contractor told me on a plane a week ago.
and could you imagine though? Can you imagine the opportunity we are missing out on that if we invest in these children, let's just categorize them for the one moment. These autistic children, we do everything we just said in our K through 12 education system. We start off slow. We don't make them wait 3 years because that lost 3 years is
No, no, no.
so much important
We
time.
need to be
You got
introducing
to
hands-on
catch it
things.
right away.
They also have to learn work skills. And a lot of grandparents come up to me that have good jobs, and they just find out they're on the spectrum when the kids get diagnosed. But those grandparents had paper routes at age 11. Now, I know those are gone now, but let's make paper route substitutes. I want that autistic kid walking the neighbor's dog, where they're working for somebody outside the family. That is really important. And I'm seeing too many parents baby the autistic kids. I'm seeing fully verbal autistic kids that have never gone shopping by themselves. Well, it's ridiculous. They're not learning bank accounts, and they're not learning basic skills that they need to have.
And and again, I just got to revert back to when I was a child. I used to walk around the neighborhood with a lawnmower. I used to shovel snow. I
Okay?
used to. I don't think I ever walked dogs, but I was like I did have newspaper routes, two different ones actually. They had a Penny Saver and the Daily News, and I had both of them at one point and another. And I did all that, and it was kind of fun, and it wasn't like really working an 8 hour shift. If I mowed two lawns and I went home with $25, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, you were
And
just super happy.
right, and or shoveled snow is even paid more because you could tell them $5 and they'll give you 20 just so they don't have to come out in the cold. And and just like you said, these we should be teaching these kids to seize these opportunities, telling
Exactly.
about them, like elderly people like myself, telling them, yeah, you really want that new pair of blue jeans. Why don't you go offer a couple of your neighbors to walk their dog? And they'd be like, oh my God, I'll give you a key to the house when I'm at work. And they'll not only pay what you agree on, they'll tip. And you'll have those jeans and those $100 Jordans in three
Or
weeks.
whatever it is you wanted.
Right.
Yeah,
And but the point I'm making there is that you have to be that mentor to that child, that
that's
tell
right.
them
That's
that
right.
that's the important thing, is that these opportunities are out there, but they don't even realize it. And I always get when I was as a child, I did all that stuff, and then as an adult, I started a cleaning business, and I had a big operation. We had 12, 14 people running around cleaning nightclubs at night. And I remember, this is another thing I think we're missing the boat on as far as education. I remember I did floors too, so I was stripping and waxing the floor of a rental place, and the owner of the rental place said, "You should take this money I'm paying you today and buy Home Depot stock." Well, I had no idea how to buy stock, but had I listened to him, I'd have done very well with that purchase. I'd have done very well with that investment. And that's something we don't talk to kids about, is the potential for investing some of the
Well,
extra
that's right.
money.
I just was talking to somebody yesterday, and there was a man with cerebral palsy, very, very disabled. And people would talk to him like he was a child, which he did not appreciate. But somebody introduced him to the stock market, and he was a very good reader, and he spent hours researching companies. And he was a kind of a careful investor. He wasn't a speculator kind. And he made a very good living on the stock market. You see, that was something where his disability did not have an effect on how well he could do things. In fact, Stephen Hawking, a famous scientist, said to the New York Times right before he died, concentrate on those things. Your disability doesn't prevent you from doing well. And he could do um, math in his head super well. And this guy with cerebral palsy was very, very good with the stock market. And he'd read all these business publications, great reader, then carefully pick out the stocks. And he'd get really mad when people would talk to him like he was a child, when he had a good brain inside a totally dysfunctional body.
And interesting you say that, because and I'm not gonna. It's not verbatim, but I remember reading something about Warren Buffett, who said, I don't think he can change I don't think he can change a toilet seat in his house, but he's wonderful with math, as we all know. He can do it. He doesn't even have a PC, personal computer on his desk. He has a calculator, and so it's just like you said. He's not handicapped. I get it, but his mental abilities prevents him from doing certain skills. But we could teach our kids that aren't great with their hands how to invest or be an integral part of an investment
Well,
firm.
there's some kids that what I've found, okay, working in the cattle industry, is a person who's a really good operations manager, like an object visualizer, runs a super good feed yard. Um, they should stay away from the futures market. I've seen people lose their feed yard, lose their beef plant, messing around in the futures market. That is a different kind of thinking. I don't even hardly understand the futures market. Now, somebody else will be brilliant at the futures market, and their feed yard's a dump.
Right,
This is where you
exactly.
need to have the different minds, one, the object visualizer to run the feed yard and take care of the cattle, and another person to do some of the finance stuff and recognize each other's skills. Because I've seen 4 or 5 times I've seen this happen. I'm a very wonderful feed yard. Um, well, they ran a beautiful feed yard and they messed around the futures market and lost the
Lost
yard.
everything.
Lost the
Or
yard. Another one lost their beef plant.
wow.
Another
And
one had a junk yard for a feed yard, but he's making a fortune in the futures market. You see, it's a different kind of thinking. You see, I don't want to have a junkyard for a feed yard. I want to have a nice feed yard. But you see, that's object visualizing because I see it. And object visualizers would be very good at taking care of the cattle and understanding animal behavior because animals don't think in words. So the kinds of things I'm good at is going to be inventing mechanical stuff, building things, taking care of animals, photography, and art. And then you have your mathematician, chemistry. Let's put it this way. You take something like a spaceship, the mathematician has to calculate the re-entry angle, which is very, very critical if you want to live. But then
Right.
the thruster units have to thrust, and you need somebody like me to put them together
Right.
because let's look at the Starliner that failed. These are the valves right here that we used in the Starliner. I found the vendor and I looked up the valves. And I've put stuff like that together myself.
Wow.
And if you get the sealant inside, do it sloppily, the little thruster's not going to work. The
Wow.
mathematician tells it when to thrust, but if you don't want gunk in it, you need someone like me to put it together.
That's amazing. Yeah. And it didn't, and it failed. Ultimately, the whole
Well,
mission
and the
failed.
problem is that some of the thrusters didn't work. And then
Right.
when I looked at this, I go, well, this valve probably cost a jillion, bunch of money, but the way that's made, the way you screw the stuff together, I mean, I put that stuff together myself. And you've got to do it carefully.
And so what that's just incredible. And you wouldn't have that training in school, but if you were the petri dish of the enabling those children to recognize their abilities and they would be just like you. They would be able to do these amazing things.
Well, then the way I was real socially awkward, but the way I sold jobs is I would simply show people pictures of my drawings. And when they saw my drawings, I gotta try to find one here. I lost the bookmark. Okay, here's one of my drawings. And I would show people my
Wow.
drawings. Hope that's not blurry.
Not at all. It's
And
very
and
clear.
that is how I sold the jobs. I showed off pictures of completed projects and I showed my drawings.
So I think, and I don't want to miss this moment, so I'm going to ask this now, but I want to continue where we were. The hug machine. You created that, right?
Yes, I did, and I built that. And yep, and it actually has it has some fittings that look very much like this. I
Really?
Yep, really. So when I
And
looked at this, I'm going, I put stuff like this together.
and made it
And these are the
work.
valves for the thruster units in the Starliner. I found the vendor and I printed this out of their webpage.
And that the hug machine has those valves,
Well,
similar
some things
valves,
much
similar.
cheaper versions of it, but
Right.
they're same kind of fittings. You screw them together the same way. You use Teflon tape. I'm not sure what sealant they would have used for the Starliner. It's either going to be a tape or it's going to be a gunk that you put on it. And if you're not careful how you do it, you're going to get bits of that stuff inside your air, inside the pipes. And thruster with a small orifice is not going to work if you get the gunk in there.
Right. It's gonna get
You've
clogged or
got to
whatever,
you've
stuck.
got to do it carefully. And you see, I see it. You see, this is where you need both kinds of minds. The mathematician tells it when to thrust, but if you want the thrusters to work, you're going to need the object visualizer.
And it creates when you have this ability and you're able to convey this message to people, it creates a world of opportunity. Now I'm just saying, this is hypothetical. If Elon Musk were to see this interview, he may call you out to to consult on
Well, you see,
certain
now
things.
he what he did. I was reading a thing about some uh, um, unit they were had to put in the rocket that was very, very, very expensive, and they found they could make it for a fraction of the price of the local machine shop. The other thing that really reduced the price that was brilliant is that booster that lands on its tail. That's absolutely brilliant how that works. And that booster, if you when you save it, having it land on its tail rather than land in the ocean and get ruined, uh, that's half the cost of the rocket right there. You see, that's a major, major breakthrough. And the other thing I've read is that he learned that off-the-shelf parts work. You can buy off-the-shelf electronics that will work. You don't have to have special custom-made, $3,000 valve when they are or $100,000 valve when a $3,000 valve would work. when you could just use regular industrial components. Those are also other things that got the cost down.
And he's
But
actually done some really incredible things as far as engineering. So for
well,
I just read
the
about the
rocket that lands
chopstick
on his tail,
arms.
and then that other rocket that goes into what they call the chopstick.
Chopstick arms.
I
Chopstick
will
arms.
watch that. That is a real engineering feat.
Genius, because when the rocket was landing, the fire was still going out from under it. So it condenses that fire back into the whole rocket and it explodes. The chopstick arms is holding it in the air till the fire runs out. It was pretty brilliant.
Oh no, it's totally brilliant. No, I saw videos on that, and there were engineers saying, "Well, this is engineering history." That's just absolutely positively brilliant. I've watched a bunch of those videos. Also, on the older rocket that landed on a barge, I watched some of the videos of how it was tumbling, and then it would gradually straighten itself out. And it's an absolute total feat of computer programming too.
That's all programming, right?
Yeah, it's all programming, and then it has to set down on the target, and it's given a very, very clear target that it can save, and it lands on the target, just like a 1950s rocket, science fiction rocket would land on its tail.
Wow. And then
But
they
that
made
is by reusing that booster, it's half the cost of the
you're
rocket
eliminating losing that booster, which is
because you're
like you
not
said,
throwing it in the ocean.
right. Which is also eliminating environmental waste.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's and then the other big thing was the commercial parts would work.
You know, the other thing Elon Musk did that I found fascinating was the tunneling business. It's called the Boring Company, and they said he's now gotten to the point where tunneling was at $1 million a mile, and he's down to maybe 10% of that, or even less. You know, and it's just like you said, it's all these great minds. Who knows? It's all these great minds, but we need to find these minds and develop them, and we would literally suddenly we wouldn't be at such a deficit in trade if we were literally cultivating who knows how many autistic children are in
Well, the
America that we
problem is
could.
we've got like the object visualizers. I mean, Musk grew up. He had his. I think his father was an engineer. He had access to all kinds of shop stuff. Um, Also learned how to work really hard. One of the big problems I'm seeing today with a lot of autistic kids is not learning enough work skills, and they are not the same skills as academic skills. And
And
I strongly recommend you've got an autistic kid in high school, he needs to or she needs to have summer jobs in the regular workplace. Now, I want to give you two little hints that are going to really help with the jobs. Um, I have trouble remembering sequential directions. So if somebody says to me, this is how you clean the ice cream machine, this is how you set up the espresso machine, and they just tell you yak, 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 I don't remember the sequence. No, you
okay.
need to make a pilot's checklist. Step one, step two, step three, pilot's checklist. And the other thing is, I'd avoid the chaos kind of jobs, which would be a super busy Starbucks window, and you're trying to make the drink and get the money at the same time. Uh, Chaos at holidays in stores. There was one 18-year-old girl that she was stuck in a clothing store during the Christmas rush, just too much. Probably try to avoid those things. And then find the right person to work with them. Because when they make social mistakes, you can't just say you're rude to customers. You need to tell them exactly what they did wrong. Well, you can't just say to the customer, put it in the bags yourself. Well, you have to say to the customer, would you like to have a bag? You explain exactly what they need to do.
Well, you come across that a lot, even with children that are not like I was a restaurant manager for many years. I think the biggest thing I used to mention to all new kids in service, never say no problem. Say it's my pleasure. So you kind of the communication skills is always. I know when people say thank you for that soda, and the kids say it's no problem. Never say it was never assumed to be a problem. Say it's my pleasure. Thank you. Let me know if you need
Yeah, that's
anything
right.
else.
Well, you just explain to them exactly what they should say.
But we always give, this is the thing that I'm going to make a bold statement, and I'm going to use the word always. We always give the kids that don't have challenges the courtesy of going through it step by step. But when it's autistic kids, we just assume they're never going to get it. We go, I don't even know if we mention it again to. And I don't, I do. I can work with anybody. I can work with autistic kids. I can work with troubled kids. I mean, I worked at a restaurant for nearly 25 years. The whole demographics of the area was tough kids that never got a break in life. And we had great working relationships. We had great time working, and we got a lot of good stuff done in the store that had horrible customer service until we all started working together. But more people need to do that.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No problem. Yeah, more people need to do just like you said is and get those kids with autism in the supermarkets, but not during the holiday. Give them a little break
Now,
during
let's not do it during the holiday.
Thanksgiving.
That's just,
Thanksgiving, you got a 300 people waiting at the door to open, and these poor kids are going to be overwhelmed. They're not going to know what to do. They're not going to remember the
the
step-by
other thing
steps.
that can be a problem for autistic kids is changing bosses. There's been a lot of situations where an autistic kid was doing very, very well in a job or an autistic adult, then they changed bosses. And when I was working for the State Farm magazine, we got a new boss and he thought I was really weird. And a lot of the articles weren't not byline. So he didn't know how much work I had done. He was going to get rid of me because it was weird. But the lady that did the graphics layout, who I'm pretty sure was autistic, said, we got to get together a big portfolio of all of your work to show the new boss. And when I showed him the work, he gave me a raise. Changing bosses can be a really dangerous time for somebody on the autism spectrum. And they could have had a job where it worked great for years. I remember one guy, he had a little shop in the middle of a meat processing plant. He could fix anything. He was there for years. Plant got sold. They sent him to another plant and it did not go well.
Well,
Been very, very successful for years as sort of being the resident electrical genius in this plant.
and that is something that's going to happen in life, but imagine if there was an if corporate America had an understanding of that challenge and took it into consideration, so when the transition happened, at least the new boss was informed of this person's abilities and this
Well,
person's challenges.
that didn't happen.
Right.
And I've heard a lot of sad stories where when bosses changed, they the autistic person ended up leaving a job maybe they'd been in for years and been very successful.
And that's a sad loss for the company as well as for the person
Well,
and
the
for
thing I have found is that we need that. Well, they used to think the weird guy in the maintenance shop that could fix anything. 20 years ago, we had these people. They no longer exist in the plants. They have a real problem finding people that just fix things because the object visualizer is the one that's going to be the best at that kind of factory maintenance, figure out how to modify a machine or do something that make it do something different. That person's gone. And they're getting labeled as handicapped. They can't do math. No, we've got to back off on the algebra. And then let's work more on the mechanical aptitude. And you do need some training in just working with levers and ramps, gears, some of the things that are on the mechanical aptitude test. So you understand how they work.
like you said about the military exam, I remember I took an exam for the Air Force. It was all about gears. Like if it went this way, which way would it go after and stuff. And I aced it. And I actually didn't join the Air Force afterwards. But I think if I had some of that training in school, I'd have been an engineer today. But I didn't. It's like
Well,
you
the
said, it was
thing
all
is that the
academics.
mathematical engineer, the person who's a really good mathematical engineer, often doesn't see some of the very simple mechanical things. See, it's a different kind of skill. And we need these people. You see, there's the mathematical side of engineering, and then there's what I call the clever engineers. And I discuss that in my visual thinking book. And these are the object visualizers that just see how things work. And many of them have failed algebra. And I'm worried that we're screening them out, and we need these people.
We need them.
And it's a
We
different type of skill.
and we really
And
need
then
them.
I talked to another technical college that had a 4-year engineering degree, and they told me that their two best people that they had in the shop, they could build anything, failed algebra, failed math, had to drop out of the program. So we need to have another type of certificate or degree or something for maybe factory design or something like that, where it's the non-mathematical side of engineering. And you see, I like the first step people have to realize is that people think differently. And you see, in being a visual thinker, I think in specific examples. I mean, until I got to my late 30s, I thought everybody thought in pictures. I thought everybody thought in pictures. No, that is not true. And I sat next to another oil field contractor on another flight, and he was telling me about his kids. And there were just the differences between night and day. He says, my 9-year-old figured out how to run the excavator. He couldn't sit in the seat, couldn't reach the pedals, but he'd stand and he'd back like this, working the controls. And he loved the machines and he figured out how to run them all. He was 9 years old. Of course, they were doing that on private property. And
Right.
the other kid that was super good in school could care less about the machines. They were like the difference between night and day, and he was really good in school. And the kid that could do anything with the machines hated school. They were totally different, even though they were raised in the same environment and went to the same school. They were different kinds of minds,
Entirely different types of
entirely
minds.
different kinds of minds. And so I tell business leaders the first step is you have to realize that the different kinds of minds exist and they have different skill sets. And what happens in autism is you can get an extreme visualizer or an extreme mathematician, where the so-called normal people, you get more mixtures, where you may get the guy who managed to get C's in math and get through the engineering program. They were super good because you've got some visualization skills.
So there is so much opportunity that we can there is so much work we can do to improve our K through 12 education system. Just like you said, we keep doing this cookie cutter effect where everybody has to do
Well,
algebra.
everybody is not the same because I'm also seeing some bad stuff. Teachers have been telling me that we're not developing our math kids. So you have a third or fourth grader that's good at math. Don't make him do baby math. He might need to do high school and college math.
He might need to
You
be,
need, you need to
yes,
move that kid ahead because otherwise they just get bored and they turn into total trouble when they get bored.
exactly. Their minds race, they start getting rambunctious, they start fidgeting, they start making silly
Well,
jokes.
and then they do things that are worse sometimes than that. No, we need to be developing those math skills, and we're not doing it. And then they give you all kinds of stupid reasons why you can't do it.
So, um, there is so much opportunity that we could be doing better in K through 12 education. And it's just something I keep trying to explain to people. And you've done it better than, of course, you've done it better than me. You're incredible at it. But it's like, you just think of how we could create a better society. We could have even less crime. We could have less poverty. If we could have less of an issue with trade deficits. If we really invested in our,
Well,
in,
I didn't realize, uh, until I went on, most of my work has been with beef plants. And then I go and visit brand new pork plant, brand new chicken plant. This was just before COVID. And all the equipment was from Holland. I was just shocked. I walk around the plant. I said, if I see that nameplate again from that Dutch company, I'm going to just scream. Every piece of equipment had it.
and
And this is high wage, very specialized machinery, kind of difficult to manufacture. All mechanical stuff.
And we have the people that can do it here. We're just not harnessing their abilities. We're just
We're
not
not.
seizing
And
the
when I
moment.
first, I spent 25 years in construction, especially in the 70s, 80s, and the 90s. And and I worked with people that were definitely autistic visualizers that owned shops. And one of the problems we have today is if the school does have a shop class, they say, well, special ed kids can't take shop because of liability. Well, in my generation, special ed kids owned the shops
And
instead of,
that's where we should be. Not necessarily just that. Not just say take special ed kids and put them in the BOCES classes. Let's understand them. And there's a way to build that understanding. And the way to build that understanding is through
well,
our
the way you're
elderly
going to see,
generation, elderly people.
we got too many kids today growing up that have never used a tool. I was
Right.
tools in second grade. I had a student in my class last year. They have to do a scale drawing in my livestock handling class who had never used a ruler in her life to measure anything.
Right. And and then you get them in this class and sometimes they think it's kind of fun to do this stuff. And why haven't they been exposed to it at all yet? You
Well,
just
I know,
gotta
I think it's
wonder.
really bad. And we're going to need people that, keep the power systems working, keep water systems working.
And we've got all kinds of new stuff coming up too that we don't really have engineers for it. Things are changing dramatically. Things are getting more and more scientific as the days
Yeah.
go on. It's not
Then I also discuss things with risk, like I talked about some disasters in my book, Visual Thinking. And one of them was Fukushima. And the mistake that caused it to burn up was a visual thinking mistake. The engineers did a great job of making it earthquake proof. They could witstand all the shaking.
But they didn't
But
make it
then 20
waterproof.
minutes later, the tsunami drowned it because they didn't put watertight doors on to protect the electrical emergency cooling pump that was in the basement.
And I caught that right when
Simple
you said that.
watertight doors would have saved it.
Would have saved a major meltdown, the worst meltdown in
It
history.
would have totally prevented it.
And they never even and
But you see,
actually
they didn't see it. I used to say it was because they were stupid. No, they don't see the water coming in there. The mathematician calculates. They don't see it. This is why you need to have both kinds of minds. You need someone like me to go, well, you bet. I just looked up the historical data, and that 10-meter seawall is going to get breached, and you better have waterproof doors on that thing.
so just taking note of that for 1 minute, taking that right in. Could you imagine if we could have prevented one of the worst to date nuclear meltdown in
Well,
history
that
by
would have prevented it.
prevented it?
All I need to know about that reactor, and I can't design a nuclear reactor, is if that pump doesn't work when I need it, I'm in so much trouble. It's just that
But the
simple.
pump that went out because of the electric.
Well, because it was underwater, and electric motors don't run underwater.
Right. But if it wasn't underwater, it would have at
It
least
would
bought
have
them
been run, and it
time.
would have been fine.
Right. Or bought them time to mitigate the problem significantly.
Well, if they wouldn't have, if it hadn't drowned the electric motor, it would have run. And
That's
then
just
let's say
incredible to
now
me.
there was another Fukushima nuclear power plant that wasn't as badly flooded, and they basically had giant extension cords that went between, and they had one generator, and they had to run the pumps, take turns running the pumps.
Right, but they were able to do that because it
But the
wasn't so
pumps weren't
flooded.
flooded. The basements
Right.
were not
So
flooded.
if there were waterproof doors in the pumps if there were waterproof doors between the pumps and the pumps that were flooded, they would have
Well, if
had
they
that
had
same
waterproof
option.
doors, the pumps wouldn't have gotten wet.
Right. Or they would have had the same option to right. And then you don't and to think when you think of that, because I didn't even have Fukushima on my mind of how what we could do differently in this world with seizing the moment with kids with challenges and their real abilities, the abilities we never take the moment to find out. Everything could be different in a lot of ways. And you also think about kids with autism. You also think about how do we know kids that don't have a family, troubled kids that grow up in poor neighborhoods. How do we know who they could be if we don't ever take the
Well,
time to
let's look
understand
at
them?
things. One of the things that's very important for a lot of troubled kids is mentors. And for the boys, having a strong male mentor. I worked with people in construction when they told me the shop teacher turned them around. Again, we could tap into retirees, work with some of these kids, teach them how to fix cars. And then some of these video game addicts, one of the things that's been successful in getting them off of it has been car mechanics. And they found out motors were more interesting than video games. And working and then set up a place where they can, work on cars.
They used to have auto shops in schools too, and
Yep.
and they're all gone. They're all gone. That's
Yeah,
all
there's
gone now.
some places starting to put it back in. Texas has actually started to put some of those things back in. And I've seen some really good, really great programs. But we also need to be having little kids making things. I mean, I was doing little woodworking projects in fifth grade.
When I was a kid, we had a wood shop. It was fun. I mean, basically, we all made wood boxes with hinges and a top, and
Yeah.
and it had like the back was a little taller than the front, so you could like hang it. And I remember hanging it in the house on a hook, and I would always be the one to put something in it for no other reason than to put something in it. But it really gave you a sense of fulfillment. It really gave you a sense of accomplishment, and it took numerous
Oh,
visits
that's
to that
right.
shop class to finish it. We
Yeah,
sanded
that's
it, we
right.
polished it, and it was really great. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I don't think we offer that anymore in a lot. Maybe in Texas they're starting to back up, and we should be starting to back up across all 50 states because there's a lot of need for stuff like that.
Yeah. No,
Eh,
we need these skills, and this is something that I've talked to business people about. No, we're coming up on the end of the hour, so I want to make sure that we've talked about everything.
I think we covered a lot, and I hope you I think we did cover a lot. It's been a great conversation. I've enjoyed it tremendously. I think a lot of people will. We're going to publish it. We're going to get it on Spotify. We're going to get it on YouTube channel. We're going to get it on Apple Podcast.
Oh,
Um,
great. Wonderful.
Beautiful. And it's been incredible. And I do want to talk about, I'll stay in touch with you, talk about doing it again. But I do want to say like, share, subscribe, comment. Thank you so much. I would like you to pitch yourself a little bit before we get off. Talk about your book, talk about your career. This is Temple
Well,
Grandin.
I started out I designing livestock handling facilities. That was shown very nicely in HBO movie. And then there's a scene where I approached the editor of the magazine, and I became the livestock editor of that magazine for 7 years. And that was really important on getting my career started, because when I covered a cattle feeders meeting, I got a reputation for summarizing the talks really accurately. And then I also wrote about the things I designed. And there's a lot of people doing some very good things, but they're not writing about how they did it. This is something I did. I did a lot of articles on how I did different things and gradually built up my career. And I'd majored in psychology in college to dodge math classes. And then I got a master's in psychology. I had to be tutored in statistics. I got my master's degree in 75, and I was a livestock editor for the magazine at that time. And then I was out designing things. And then around in the late 80s, there was a recession. And I figured that I'd have a 2-year period where I could get my PhD classes done. And that turned out to be true. And then
Wow.
it took a long time to get my PhD finished because I was out working on equipment in the plants again. The recession did end 2 years later. And then in 1990, I went to Colorado State. I talked to a friend of mine named Bernard Rolland, and he helped open the back door to have me start being part-time professor at Colorado State. And I'm now half-time professor at Colorado State, teach a class in livestock handling, still out doing consulting, and things have gradually changed to more of doing talks now on the different kinds of thinking, because I'm very concerned about the skill loss, especially in the mechanical aptitude object visualizer. And so those are some of the things I'm doing now. And I try to just give a lot of parents practical advice. And I see too many parents, they get trapped into the label. And the kid kind of becomes the label. My primary identity is being a university professor. Autism is an important part of who I am, but that's secondary to a career.
You are a university professor and an
Yes, I am a
engineer
university professor. That's
and an
right.
engineer. There's the autism is just something it's a challenge. It's how you think. It's
Well, and
fine.
people ask me if I could snap my fingers, would I want to be not autistic? I like the logical way I think.
Right. I,
That's something that I like. And
and you
right
like the
now, I want
person
to
you
see
are.
a lot of the other kids that think differently be successful. Because I worked with a lot of people that were definitely autistic that were very successful in what they did. Now, again, we have to remember this spectrum is going all the way from Einstein to somebody is not going to be out building things or doing mathematics for computers or whatever. You see, you have a lot of people in the tech industry where it's more of the mathematical type of mind. And then you have much more severe autism where they can never live independently and it all has the same name.
Right, but just imagine,
Some of the severe autistics can learn to type independently. And they might be similar to the guy with cerebral palsy, where he had a good brain inside, but a totally dysfunctional body. And there's some people with an autism label that have problems with controlling movement, and with a lot of work, they can learn to type independently. And there's others where they're not going to be able to learn that. And they've got very severe epilepsy and other physical problems on top of the autism diagnosis. And one problem we got with the verbal thinkers is they overgeneralize. So they're putting a kid that maybe needs to be moved ahead in math class in the same category as somebody who can't dress themselves. And because they
right.
have the same label. You see, let's say you're labeled with dyslexia, you've got a much narrower, okay, you can't read. Or you're labeled ADHD. I mean, that's attention issues. It's a much narrower spectrum.
But they bundle you in one class. They
Yeah, but the autism, you're going all the way from Einstein to somebody that might have needs 24/7 care with the same name. Now, I want to emphasize that when the kids are little, really little, when I was 3, I looked really terrible. And you really can't tell how they're going to come out, but you've got to do that early intervention. That is just so important. And one thing that was in my favor when I was 3 was I did not have epilepsy. There were two things they could check for in 1949 was epilepsy and deafness. If you have a little kid that's not talking, you got to rule out deafness. And then let's get some retired teacher working with this kid, just playing with them, playing games, because turn taking games, all different, and learning how to wait and take turns was a very important part of my therapy. I remember some of that really well.
Well, Temple, this has been incredible. I know you have other stuff scheduled, so I can talk. But I don't
Okay.
I don't do you have to go? You have to go, though. Do you have another stuff?
Yeah, I have another session coming up.
Okay. So can we in I will stay in touch. Can we talk about doing this again?
Okay, sure. All you have to do is just contact me.
Yeah, absolutely. I have all your contact information, so
Okay,
I
well, that's
will.
great.
This has been
And thank you
incredible.
very, very much for having me on your show.
Thank you. I am so appreciative. You've been so generous with your time. You've been so informative. These are all things of enormous interest to me, and education is my thing. I'm a Jesuit. I want to know about education from every angle, and so I'm very appreciative of you taking the time.
Another
And
thing I was want to say, we need the skills of the people that think differently. And one, I'm very concerned that we're not, when I look at, I can't believe the broken elevators. A lot of places have taken the inspection certificates off, or they're a year out of date. I saw one the other day in Illinois, it was only 1 month out of date. Well, I haven't seen that in any other state. They've tended to be disappearing now.
yeah, they just want to do away with the expense, but it's important that we
Well,
we,
the
we
thing is,
maintain these things.
you've got to maintain elevators. I've been on some pretty dicey ones that make some pretty weird noises. I'm going, one of them we had at the airport. It sounded like the 1950s submarine bong bong sounds. I'm going, I hope I don't get stuck in this.
That would scare me to death because I'm kind of claustrophobic.
I don't
But
want to get stuck in an elevator and miss my flight. With some very questionable elevators.
yeah,
And
yeah, missing
the
your
thing is,
flight
we
too is
don't
an
have,
issue.
they're not being serviced. You can hear scraping sounds in the track. It hasn't been serviced.
Wow.
And there'll be
Yeah, and that's
mechanical
there's not
devices
people to
for the
service them. Is the
foreseeable
other
future.
there's yeah, there's not a lot of people to service them. We need to get we I will work on this more and more and more and more and more. And I'm gonna get a lot of people involved with it as
Well,
best
there's a
I
lot of
can.
different types of elevators. And the other thing is the elevator companies are all European now.
Which could be an incredible career for somebody here at home.
Well, that's just it. And then you look at the glass elevators where I can really look at the mechanism and I look at the little fiddly mechanism that makes the doors work. Yeah, those things are going to have to be maintained. I
Or
can see it
replaced,
right
which is
now in our parking garage elevator, but I love the ones that are glass where I can see the mechanism.
then you can critique it too.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, thank you so much,
All
Temple.
right.
This has
Thank you
been
very, very
wonderful.
much for
Thank
having me.
you. It's been my pleasure. Believe me, it's been my honor. Thank you so much, Temple. I
Thank you
will
for
stay in
having me.
contact.
So I guess I'll leave the meeting now.
Yes, ma'am.
And it was great to be on the show.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. We'll talk to you
Okay.
soon.